My daughter screamed, "Get out, or I'll call the cops." So I left. And I called a realtor instead. She was certain I had nowhere to go. By sunset, I had 3 offers. It was the kind of Saturday afternoon that California is famous for. Warm sunlight draped over the manicured lawns, and the hum of conversation rose above the gentle clinking of wine glasses. Laughter spilled out into the street like music from an open window. Claire had invited her usual crowd, colleagues from her law firm, a few of Mark's golf buddies, and some women from her neighborhood fitness group. I, Helen Sterling, remained where I always did, just beyond the circle of conversation in the kitchen. I pulled a tray of still warm shortbread cookies from the oven. It was an old recipe, passed down from my mother. I arranged them neatly on a platter, wiped my hands on my apron, and carried them out to the patio with the same careful grace I had learned as a young bride. The backyard was buzzing with chatter. Claire stood at the center, a cocktail in her hand, laughing a little too loudly and gesturing a little too widely, her blonde bob swaying with every word. I caught Mark's eye as I stepped outside. He offered a polite, fleeting smile, then looked away. "Cookies, everyone," I said softly, offering the tray. The group turned to me, some taking a treat out of politeness. One woman took a bite and murmured her appreciation. That's when Claire chuckled. "Oh, she just sort of stays here," she said, gesturing toward me with a casual wave, as if I were a piece of furniture, a fixture, a parasite. The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, just uncomfortable and nervous, but it still landed like a slap. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, holding that tray, pretending my hands weren't shaking. I looked down. Mark avoided my gaze. No one corrected her. No one asked her to stop. I turned, went back into the house, and placed the platter on the counter. I spent the rest of the evening in silence, collecting empty glasses, scraping plates, and rinsing dishes. No one would thank me for it. By the time the last guest left and Claire's heels clicked upstairs, I was wiping the granite countertop until it shone. Mark passed behind me, mumbled a half-hearted "Thanks, Helen," and disappeared. Not Mom. Not even mother-in-law. Just Helen. 3 days later, I was alone in the kitchen again, preparing my morning tea. I reached into the cupboard for a mug, and in my haste, brushed a tall glass off the drying rack. It shattered on the tile floor with a sharp, echoing crash. "Damn it," I whispered to myself, bending down to pick up the shards. I didn't even hear Claire enter. "What did you do now?" she barked. "I'm so sorry, She held up a hand to stop me. "You should know your place," she said, her voice tight. "Don't think you have a right to be here." I looked up at her, pieces of glass still in my hand. "Claire, no," I started. "You think just because you're old, you're entitled?" she snapped. "You think living here is some kind of reward for being passive-aggressive and cleaning up crumbs?" "I didn't mean." "I swear to God," she hissed, "if you don't get out of this house, I will call the cops." I froze. Claire had always been sharp, even rude. But this was different. "I'm your mother," I said softly. "This is my house. You think that matters?" she cut in, pulling her phone from her pocket. "Get out, now, or I swear." I thought she was bluffing. I did, right up until I saw her thumb tap the screen, heard the dial tone, and watched her press the phone to her ear. "Hello, yes," she said calmly. "I need to file a trespassing report." I didn't hear the rest. I walked past her, out the back door, and into the garden where my rosemary and daisies still bloomed. I stood among them, my breath shallow, the sun suddenly too bright. This garden had been mine. The soil under my nails, the seeds I'd planted, the afternoons I'd spent pruning with care and hope. It was the only place in this house that still felt like me. And yet, even here, her voice reached me, sharp and certain, speaking to someone on the other end of the line. She was really doing it. She was calling the police. In that moment, standing barefoot on the back patio surrounded by everything I had grown, I understood something I hadn't wanted to face for years. Claire didn't see me as a mother, not anymore. She saw me as an obstacle, an embarrassment, a burden to be removed. And for the first time since my husband Robert died, I didn't feel old. I didn't feel tired. I felt awake, cold and awake. This wasn't my home anymore, but it was still my house. And now, for the first time in a long time, I was going to act like it. It was the spring of 1983 when Robert and I first stepped into the old Victorian fixer-upper, nestled on a quiet street in a sleepy California suburb. The paint was peeling, the floors creaked, and the kitchen tiles looked like they hadn't been touched since the 1950s. But to us, it was a castle. We had been married for 16 years by then. 16 years of clocking in early, clocking out late, and saving every dime. We didn't honeymoon in Paris. We honeymooned in a borrowed cabin upstate, cooked canned chili on a portable stove, and drank hot cocoa under a single blanket. That was our style. No extravagance, just effort. Robert ran his hand across the banister that day and grinned like a man seeing his future take shape. "It's got good bones," he said. "Like us." And so we bought it. The tired house, with chipped shutters and a patchy lawn. And we made it our home. I remember painting the living room walls together one summer morning, Robert balancing on a ladder in faded jeans, humming old country songs under his breath. Claire, just 6 years old, danced barefoot across the drop cloths, her hair in 2 messy pigtails. "Careful, baby," Robert warned her, smiling. "Or Mama's going to paint you instead of the walls." She giggled, spinning in circles, a splotch of green already on her cheek. We didn't have much, but we had warmth. Dinners on the front porch, homemade Halloween costumes, hand-sewn curtains, a backyard garden that was more weeds than vegetables, but mine, all the same. That house watched us become a family. It watched me cry when Robert got laid off, then cheer when he found a job fixing HVAC units. It saw birthdays, scraped knees, school projects, and sleepless nights. It held our memories, layered into its very wood. And when Robert got sick in 2006, it became our final chapter. We turned the downstairs den into a bedroom for him because stairs had become too much. I cooked soup and rubbed his back through the worst nights. He passed away quietly one morning in that same room, sunlight streaming through the blinds. I stayed in the house for another 5 years after that. Every creak, every corner carried his voice. But grief has a way of hollowing out even the warmest spaces. In 2011, Claire suggested I move in with her and Mark Dotke. "It'll be better for both of us," she said. "You won't be alone anymore, and we've got the space now." At first, I resisted. The house was mine, after all. But loneliness is a tricky thing. It can make even ghosts feel like company. So I agreed. I packed up my life, the wedding photos, the crockery, the memories, and handed the keys to a property manager to rent the house out for income. I moved into the guest room of Claire's suburban 2-story, thinking I'd be surrounded by warmth again. At first, it was pleasant. But over time, the lines blurred. She started reorganizing my things. My knitting basket disappeared. My old clock was replaced by a sleek digital one. The home began to feel less like ours and more like hers. Then came the rules. No boiling garlic, no watching TV past 10, no guests without her approval. One day she told me gently that my garden pots on the patio made the space look cluttered. I complied. I always complied. There's a unique kind of heartbreak that comes not from strangers, but from someone you raised. Still, I held on, telling myself that family meant patience. What Claire didn't know, and never thought to ask, was that the old house, the one Robert and I bought and built a life in, still belonged to me. The title, the deed, every inch of wood and tile. Even after I moved out, I never transferred ownership. I kept the documents in a locked drawer, tucked behind old letters and photographs, because something in me, even in the early days, didn't fully trust the comfort she offered. Maybe it was a mother's instinct. Maybe it was just knowing that some things, like home, shouldn't be handed over too easily. And as I sat in the small guest room of Claire's house, remembering Robert's smile, the smell of paint, and our daughter's giggles echoing through the walls of a half-renovated home, I realized this. I had given enough. When Claire married Mark, I thought he was a good man. He was quiet, respectful, and always held the door open for me. But I didn't realize then that Mark's silence would become a shelter, not for me, but for Claire's cruelty. It started small. "Mom, maybe don't cook with fish sauce. The smell lingers. Could we avoid fried foods during the week? It just doesn't feel clean. Can you try to be in your room by 10? We're trying to create a calming nighttime routine." At first, I didn't protest. I didn't want to be a burden. I cleaned up after myself, kept my slippers by the door, and folded laundry tighter than necessary. Then it was no guests, no music unless with headphones, no drying laundry outside, no buying more plants because they crowded the aesthetic. Eventually, I realized my world had shrunk to a single room and a single role. Stay invisible. I was allowed to cook, clean, and water the yard, but not decorate it, not live in it. I became what Claire once told her friends, someone who enjoyed being helpful. But it felt less like help and more like servitude. She never said thank you. She didn't have to. I was the unpaid maid, the ghost in the hallway. But ghosts hear things. One night, I came downstairs quietly to warm a glass of milk. I paused at the edge of the kitchen when I heard them talking. "She's just always there," Claire said. Mark mumbled something I couldn't catch. "She's draining us, Mark," Claire continued. "She's exhausting, like emotional clutter." I stood there in the dark, my hands trembling. The hallway was cold, but my ears burned. Emotional clutter. That's what I had become. Not a mother, but a pile of dusty junk in the corner. I backed away before they saw me. I didn't say anything, not the next morning, not the one after. That's the thing about silence. It isn't weakness. It's a ledger. And I was taking notes. Claire didn't yell often. She preferred the slow drip of disdain. But one evening, she slipped. We were having dinner with two of Mark's friends, business types who called themselves investors. I had spent the day preparing roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans. Midway through dinner, one of the men joked, "This chicken's amazing. Claire, did you cook it?" Claire laughed without missing a beat. "Oh God, no. That's our resident freeloader's work." The room went quiet for a second too long, then filled with shallow, forced laughter. I didn't say a word. I simply smiled. Mark glanced at me, then quickly looked down. Resident freeloader. I excused myself before dessert. I didn't cry. But I didn't sleep that night. I sat in bed and stared at the ceiling, hearing every word she'd ever said stack themselves into walls between us. She wasn't the girl I raised. That girl disappeared somewhere along the way, replaced by ambition and resentment. But she forgot something important. The house she now ruled with her designer furniture and meal kits, it still belonged to me. It always had. And the woman she called a freeloader, she still had the deed. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. I was folding the laundry. Mine, Claire's, Mark's. I'd even matched their socks. Old habits die hard. Claire came into the room holding a sleek folder. She sat across from me, crossing her legs like a businesswoman about to pitch a sale. "Mom," she began too smoothly, "I need a favor." I looked up from the laundry. "What kind of favor?" She smiled, the tight kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "Just something simple. Paperwork, really. It's about the house." My body stiffened. "What about it? It would just make things easier if it were in my name. You know, for tax purposes, refinancing, equity applications. Nothing changes. You'd still live here, of course. Still live here. In my own house." "I don't think that's necessary," I said quietly, folding a towel with deliberate care. Claire sighed, as if I were being difficult. "It's just a signature. You wouldn't even have to go anywhere." I looked her square in the eyes now. The silence that followed was thick. "No, no," she echoed, as if the word itself offended her. "No, Claire, that house is still in my name. It's the only thing your father and I built together. I'm not signing it away." Her lips tightened. She stood abruptly and left the room. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. A week later, I received a phone call from my bank. They had questions about a mortgage application tied to my address. Confused, I asked for more information. That's when I learned that Claire had attempted to secure a home equity line of credit in her name, using my house, using forged documents that listed her as the primary owner. I asked for copies. The bank, sensing something was off, complied. There it was. My daughter's signature on papers claiming she was the rightful owner, that she had inherited the property, that she had taken over the care of her elderly mother and was now handling all financial decisions. I stared at the documents for a long time, my hands trembling. It was no longer about disrespect. It was theft. Later that evening, I confronted her calmly. I spoke to the bank, I said, standing in the doorway of her pristine kitchen. I know what you did. She didn't flinch. She poured herself a glass of water. You shouldn't be poking around in things you don't understand, Mom. I understand perfectly, I said. You tried to steal this house. She leaned against the counter, sipping her water. Look, she said, her voice suddenly sharp. You're not getting any younger. You don't work. You don't contribute. All you do is occupy space. I take care of this house, I said. I cook. I clean. You exist, she interrupted. Like wallpaper. That hurt. But I stood my ground. And still, I said, it's my name on the deed. Her face twisted. For a second, I saw panic, rage, and entitlement flash behind her eyes. Then she laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You think that matters? You think that paper means something? You don't own this house, Mom. Not really. You live here because we let you. Because I had a moment of guilt and thought maybe it would be nice to have family around. But let's be honest, no one kept you here out of love. I felt those words land, one by one, like stones on a casket. And if you won't cooperate, she said, stepping closer, then maybe you shouldn't be here at all. What does that mean? It means, she said slowly, you have 1 week to leave, or I will call the police and tell them you're trespassing. That was the moment I realized my daughter didn't just want me gone. She wanted everything. She mistook my silence for surrender. But she forgot. I wasn't the one trespassing. I was the one who owned the land beneath her feet. It was just past 2 a.m. when I rose from bed without making a sound. I moved slowly, deliberately. After all, I'd rehearsed this night in my head for weeks. The house was still. I opened my closet and took out the small suitcase I hadn't touched in years. Inside, I packed the essentials, a few pieces of clothing, my worn leather wallet, the marriage certificate Robert and I signed in 1967, his death certificate, and, most importantly, the title deed to the house. My hand brushed against the photograph I'd kept in a silver frame. Robert in his wedding suit, grinning, and me in the cream-colored dress Mama helped me sew. I tucked it into the case. Then I sat at my little desk and wrote a note. Claire, I don't hate you, but I'm done begging for space in a home I paid for with my life. I have nothing left to give and nothing left to ask. I folded the paper and left it under the porcelain teapot she always ignored. Then I pulled on my shoes and walked out the back door for the last time. I checked into a small motel off the highway. Clean, no frills. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment. Then I reached into my handbag and pulled out a card I had been keeping. Arthur Vance, attorney at law. My husband's best friend. I dialed the number. Helen, he said, his voice groggy but alert. Everything okay? I need to talk, Arthur, I said. Today. He didn't ask why. He just said, 8 a.m., my place. At 8 a.m., I rang Arthur's doorbell. He lived in a bungalow surrounded by citrus trees. Come in, he said. You look like hell, but you always did first thing in the morning. I laughed for the first time in weeks. We sat at his kitchen table while I laid out the papers, the deed, the original purchase contract from 1983, the property tax bills, all in my name. She tried to take it from you, Arthur muttered, flipping through them. But she can't. Legally. She hasn't got a leg to stand on, Helen. This house is yours. Every inch. I want to sell it, I said. As soon as possible. He raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? Yes. He nodded slowly. I'll draw up the necessary protections. You'll need a realtor. I already have someone in mind. I left Arthur's place and walked 2 blocks to a small real estate office. Nina Sharma Realty. Nina was young, bright-eyed, the daughter of a woman I once worked with at the library. I told her what I needed. I want it listed this week. No delays, no open houses. Just show it privately to serious buyers only. Nina blinked, then nodded. Understood. I'll handle it personally. That evening, we met at the house. My house. I waited in the car while she walked the perimeter. When she returned, she handed me a clipboard. The market's hot, she said. You'll get multiple offers if we move fast. But first, she held out a pen. You need to authorize the listing. I took the pen. My signature was steady. My heart, even steadier. The sound of that pen scratching across the paper was the softest rebellion I'd ever made, and the loudest thing I'd ever said to my daughter. That night, I booked a new hotel closer to downtown and fell asleep with the curtains open, letting the city lights remind me I was no longer living under anyone's roof. I was reclaiming my own. Nina moved faster than I expected. At precisely 9 a.m., her listing went live. By 10 a.m., her phone was buzzing. By noon, she had shown the property virtually to 2 cash buyers. By 3 p.m., there were 3 offers on the table, all at or above the asking price. The first was a tech entrepreneur. The second, a pair of sisters looking to flip it. The third was a divorced woman in her 50s named Susan, who had recently received a settlement and was looking for somewhere to start over. I chose Susan. Her offer was all cash. But more than that, she spoke to Nina with a voice that was tired, kind, and firm. Nina texted me the contract. I reviewed it in silence, my reading glasses perched on my nose. My hands were steady. I clicked sign. It was done. By sunset, the house was no longer mine, but it was also no longer hers. I sat in my motel room, watching the orange light spill over the blinds. My phone buzzed beside me. Claire. ... I didn't answer. The next call came 20 minutes later. Then another. And another. By the time I had finished brushing my teeth, she had called 7 times. No voicemail. She didn't want to explain. She wanted control. I set the phone on silent and placed it screen down on the nightstand. The next morning, Claire's world shifted. At 9 a.m., a courier arrived with a certified envelope. Inside was the legal transfer of ownership. Signed, notarized, irrevocable. The property now belonged to Susan Westfield, effective immediately. Accompanying it was a formal notice of tenancy termination, 7 days to vacate, or the new owner had the right to pursue legal eviction. The envelope bore my name in the sender line. Not Mom. Not Helen. Just H. Sterling. By noon, Nina texted to let me know she had received a panicked voicemail from Claire, who was trying to dispute the sale. Nina simply replied, "All documentation is verified and filed with county records. Ms. Sterling is the sole legal owner and has executed her rights. This conversation is over." Claire then called me 8 times. She left one message. "Mom, what are you doing? You can't sell this house. We live here. Are you losing your mind? Call me back. Please, this isn't funny." That word again. We. By dinner time, my phone had rung 24 times. I didn't pick up once. It didn't take long for the neighbors to notice. By Friday, the rumors had a rhythm. "She's getting evicted. No, she's squatting. Can you believe it?" Her own mother sold the house from under her. Claire stepped outside that morning with her sunglasses on, but the tension in her jaw betrayed the truth. She packed slowly, hoping I'd appear with a change of heart. But no miracle came. Just silence and a moving truck she had to pay for herself. When she finally wheeled her Samsonite suitcases down the porch steps, she clutched her phone like a lifeline. Mark didn't help her carry a thing. He stood by the car, arms crossed. "I'm going to my mother's. he said flatly. I didn't know you went that far, Claire. He didn't wait for her to finish. He just shook his head, got in his car, and drove off. She stood there alone on the curb with 2 suitcases and a phone. No one answered. That night, around 9 p.m., I heard a knock at the security gate of my new apartment. I had just made tea, mint, and chamomile. The city glowed beyond the glass. I checked the monitor. It was Claire. Her makeup was smudged, her eyes red and puffy. She buzzed again, then knelt on the sidewalk outside the gate. She looked up at the camera, her lips parted and trembling. Finally, she spoke. Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't move. Please, she whispered. Just let me in. I have nowhere to go. The intercom was silent. Please, Mom. I watched for a moment longer. Then I stood, walked to the window, and pulled the curtain close. I didn't do it with anger, just certainty. She had taught me a lesson I never wanted to learn, that even the ones you love most can cross a line from which there is no return. My new apartment was on the 24th floor. It wasn't grand, but it was mine, fully paid for with the sale of the house. The first thing I did was set up a small herb garden on the balcony. Just mint, mostly. Robert used to love the smell. One evening, I brewed a cup of mint tea and stood at the window as dusk folded the city into soft shades of lavender. That's when the phone buzzed. Claire. I watched it ring once, then turned it face down. 10 minutes later, the intercom buzzed. I glanced at the camera. She was there again, clutching a duffel bag. Mom, she said into the speaker, her voice cracking. Please, let me stay. Just for a while. Just until I figure things out. I stepped out onto the balcony. She looked up and saw me, her face lighting up with a hope that makes you wish you didn't have to be the one to extinguish it. I said nothing for a long while. Then, softly, with the same calm she once mistook for weakness, I said, no. No! Her eyes widened, then fell. She nodded once, as if she finally understood. I walked back inside, picked up my tea, and pulled the curtain closed. I didn't need to watch her walk away. I had already left a long time ago. If you've ever been betrayed by the very person you gave life to, if you've ever stood in a room you paid for only to be treated like you didn't belong, then perhaps you understand what I mean when I say that silence isn't weakness. It's memory, sharpening its blade. I once believed loyalty meant staying quiet when Claire first rolled her eyes at me, when she replaced my decisions with her rules, when she laughed at me like I was furniture with feelings. I forgave her, again and again, because I am her mother, and mothers forgive. Until one day, we don't. What happens when the child you once rocked to sleep turns around and says, "You're just a freeloader. Get out, or I'll call the cops." Here's what I did. I grew calm. I grew quiet. And I remembered who I was before she forgot. I called the lawyer. I called the realtor. And I sold the house right out from under her feet, not out of rage, but out of truth. Now, I sit by the window of a high-rise apartment I bought with that money. Mint plants grow in small pots on my balcony. The city hums below me, and I hum right back. The phone still rings sometimes. It's Claire. Sometimes it's just ghosts. But I don't answer anymore. Because I am not the woman who begged for kindness. I am the woman who remembered what she was owed and collected it. And if you have ever been made to feel like a burden, if you have ever swallowed betrayal to keep the peace, let my story be the voice you felt you couldn't use. Let it be a reminder that your worth is not determined by those who take you for granted. Here, we remember that revenge doesn't need to shout. It simply needs to act. Please subscribe to my channel.